Look, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just out here talking on my phone. That's it. You can check it. No calls, no one else around.
Sir, we got a report. Just need you to stay calm.
I am calm, all right? But you rolled up on me like I did something. I'm just explaining. That's all.
All right, keep your hands where we can.
Police called it vandalism. Body cameras recorded every second. And hours later, the city paid $2 million for getting it wrong. On a quiet morning in a wealthy neighborhood, officers placed a black man in handcuffs for tampering with public property. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to verify, was that the man they arrested had just prevented a disaster. He wasn't damaging a fire hydrant. He was saving it. This is Terrell Blake, 34 years old, a fire equipment specialist. Level 3, the highest civilian certification in municipal fire suppression systems. 10 years with the fire department. The man responsible for making sure hydrants work when homes are burning and lives are on the line. Part of the city's own hydrant inspection protocol carries his fingerprints. When firefighters have questions about water pressure, valve alignment, or system failure, they call Terrell. Because when hydrants fail during a fire, people die. But on this morning, none of that mattered. Because Terrell wasn't wearing a uniform, he wasn't in a fire truck. He was wearing running clothes in a neighborhood where houses sell for millions and where a black man kneeling beside city infrastructure was seen as a threat. A resident called 911. Police responded with lights and suspicion. And instead of seeing a professional doing exactly what he was trained to do, officers saw a crime in progress. By the end of the morning, the hydrant would be confirmed broken. The repair would be verified as expert level. And Terrell Blake would be proven right. But first, he would be arrested for doing his job because in this country, professional expertise does not always survive contact with racial assumption. And this is how a simple act of public safety turned into a multi-million-dollar civil rights lawsuit. For Terrell Blake, fire prevention was never just a job. It was an identity built over a decade of discipline, study, and responsibility. He joined the fire department 10 years earlier as a probationary firefighter, learning the basics of suppression, response, and emergency systems. Over time, he specialized not in rushing into burning buildings, but in making sure the equipment meant to save lives would actually work when it mattered most. Terrell became a fire equipment specialist, eventually earning Level 3 certification, the highest civilian qualification available for municipal fire suppression systems. It required advanced training in fire science, hydraulics, valve mechanics, and urban water infrastructure. Few people in the city held that credential. Fewer still understood hydrants the way Terrell did. He inspected more than 3,000 fire hydrants across the city. He repaired hundreds of them. He could diagnose a malfunction by the way a valve resisted pressure, by the sound water made when it moved through damaged threads. When something was wrong, Terrell knew before anyone else. His expertise didn't stay in the field. He helped design the city's current hydrant maintenance protocol. He trained younger firefighters at the academy. When crews ran into water pressure problems during drills or emergency calls, supervisors didn't guess they called Terrell, because hydrants are not optional equipment. When they fail, fires spread faster. Response times collapse. Homes are lost. And sometimes, people don't make it out. Every morning at 6 a.m., Terrell went for a run 5 miles. A same route. Same streets. Firefighters are trained to observe, to notice small changes others miss. And after running those streets dozens of times, Terrell knew them by instinct, which is why, on one particular morning, he noticed something that most people would have walked past without ever seeing. On March 21st, just after 6:12 in the morning, Terrell Blake's routine run was interrupted by instinct. As he passed the corner of Riverside Heights Boulevard and Oakmont Drive, something felt wrong. The fire hydrant on that corner wasn't the way it had always been. Terrell had run past it dozens of times before. It had always been solid, stable, properly maintained. This morning, it moved. The bonnet, the cap at the top of the hydrant, shifted slightly in the breeze. It was subtle. The kind of detail most people would never notice. But to someone who had inspected thousands of hydrants, it stood out immediately. Terrell stopped, turned back, and knelt beside it. The threads were stripped. The valve stem beneath the bonnet was misaligned. Water was seeping slowly from the base connection. When he checked the pressure gauge, the reading wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't right. This hydrant hadn't failed yet, but it was failing. In a fire emergency, when crews connected hoses and opened the valve at full pressure, this hydrant would not deliver what it needed to. The water flow would drop. The pressure would collapse. And in a neighborhood where large homes sat close together, that kind of failure could turn a single house fire into a block-wide disaster. Terrell took out his phone and documented the damage photos of the loose bonnet, the misaligned valve, the pressure reading. Standard procedure. Evidence before intervention. Then he looked down the street. Mounted to a nearby utility pole was one of the city's emergency equipment boxes. Firefighters are trained to know where they are. Terrell knew this one well. He walked the 15 feet to the box, unlocked it with the standard key firefighters carry, and removed a hydrant wrench. He was off duty. He was in running clothes. He was not being paid. But he was a firefighter, and firefighters do not walk past equipment failures that could cost lives. The repair took less than 5 minutes. Terrell tightened the bonnet, carefully restoring the stripped threads. He realigned the valve stem, correcting the angle just enough to ensure proper flow under full pressure. At the base connection, he sealed the slow leak before it could worsen. Each movement was precise, controlled, the kind of work that comes from repetition and training, not guesswork. When he finished, Terrell cracked the valve slightly, just enough to confirm water movement and pressure. The flow responded exactly as it should. The hydrant was stable again. 5 minutes of professional work that could have made the difference between containment and catastrophe. Terrell stepped back, wiped his hands on his running shorts, and reached for his phone. His next step was routine call fire department dispatch, log the repair, and flag the hydrant for follow-up inspection. That call never happened. Across the street, behind a large front window, someone had been watching. Susan Dalton was 62 years old, a retired corporate executive who had lived in Riverside Heights for more than 2 decades. She woke early every morning, made her coffee, and sat near the window overlooking the street, watching for anything that felt out of place. At 6:12, she noticed a black man in athletic clothing stop at the fire hydrant on the corner. She watched him take photographs. She watched him open the utility box. She watched him kneel beside the hydrant with a wrench. She watched water spray briefly from the valve. Susan did not see a firefighter preventing a failure. She saw someone tampering with city property. She did not open her door. She did not call out to ask what he was doing. She picked up her phone and called 911. And with that call, a professional act of public safety was reframed as a crime in progress. The 911 call came in at 6:16 a.m. A suspicious individual was reported at the corner of Riverside Heights Boulevard and Oakmont Drive. A black male, wearing athletic clothing, taking photographs, using tools, actively interfering with a fire hydrant. The words mattered. Suspicious, tampering, vandalism, possible sabotage. Each phrase shaped how the situation would be understood long before any officer arrived. The call did not describe a broken hydrant. It did not describe a repair. It described a threat. Within minutes, the call was dispatched. Officers Justin Harper and Amanda Foster received the alert at 6:18. Possible vandalism of municipal infrastructure. Possible public safety risk. Suspect still on scene. When they arrived at 6:22, they saw exactly what dispatch had prepared them to see. A black man kneeling beside a fire hydrant. A wrench on the ground. A utility box open nearby. From their perspective, it matched the narrative. They exited their cruiser with caution. Hands resting near their belts. Their posture was alert. Their tone was authoritative. Step away from the hydrant. Put the tool down. Terrell stood up, momentarily holding the wrench because the command came without warning. When he saw the officer's body language, he understood immediately what they thought was happening. He placed the wrench on the ground carefully and raised his hands. "I'm a firefighter," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I was fixing a malfunction." The officers did not lower their guard. "Put your hands where we can see them. I am a fire equipment specialist with Station 14. Terrell continued. "That hydrant was failing. I repaired it to prevent a hazard." Officer Harper stopped several feet away, studying him. "You're a firefighter," he said. "Where's your uniform? Where's your vehicle?" "I'm off duty. I was jogging. I noticed the hydrant was damaged." The explanation was logical. It was also inconvenient, because in that moment, the story the officers had been given and the one forming in their minds was already stronger than the evidence in front of them. Terrell knew the moment the questions kept coming that this was no longer about the hydrant. It was about whether they believed him. "Do you have identification?" Officer Harper asked. "Yes," Terrell replied. "In my pocket." "I'm reaching for my wallet." He moved slowly, deliberately, the way black men are taught to move during police encounters if they want to go home alive. He removed his wallet and handed over his driver's license and his firefighter identification card. The card was official. His photograph, his name, his station assignment, his certification level. Officer Harper examined it for several seconds, then said the words that told Terrell exactly where this was going. "This could be fake. Anyone can print an ID card." In that moment, Terrell understood that proof would never be enough on its own. Still, he tried. "Call Station 14, he said. "Ask for Captain Chen. He'll confirm everything. Call fire dispatch. I'm in their system. You can verify this right now." Officer Foster began writing in her notepad. "We received a call that you were tampering with a hydrant," she said. "I documented a malfunction." Terrell replied. "I used a hydrant wrench from the utility box because that's where they're stored for emergency repairs. I'm authorized to access those boxes. I fixed the hydrant. You can check it. It works now." At that moment, a woman approached from across the street, Susan Dalton. She had called 911, and she wanted to see how it ended. "That's him," she said to the officers. "He's been messing with our hydrant for 15 minutes. God knows what he's done to our water system." Terrell turned toward her, careful not to raise his voice. "Ma'am, I wasn't tampering with it. I was repairing it. I'm a firefighter. That hydrant was broken." Susan didn't look at his ID. She didn't ask a question. "He doesn't look like a firefighter," she said. "Why would a firefighter be working on a hydrant at 6 in the morning in jogging clothes? That doesn't make sense." Her certainty carried weight, and in the silent calculation happening on the sidewalk, Terrell could feel the balance shifting away from evidence, away from expertise, And toward the easiest assumption of all, this was the moment when the situation could still have gone another way. All it would have taken was a phone call. 1 minute to contact fire dispatch. 30 seconds to verify a name. Instead, the officers made a different choice. Officer Harper looked from Susan Dalton back to Terrell. In his mind, the equation was already complete. A concerned homeowner, a suspicious report, a man without a uniform offering a story that sounded, to him, too convenient. "Sir, turn around," Harper said. "Place your hands behind your back." Terrell froze, trying to understand what he had just heard. "You're arresting me?" he asked. "For what?" "We're detaining you for investigation of vandalism of public property and possible tampering with municipal infrastructure." Vandalism. The word landed heavier than the handcuffs. "I fixed it," Terrell said. "Call the fire department. Check the hydrant. It was broken. Now it works. We'll verify everything at the station." Harper replied, "Verify later." Harper pulled out the cuffs. Terrell turned slowly, feeling the cold metal close around his wrists. The sound of the ratchet echoed in the quiet street. Neighbors had begun to watch from behind curtains and windows. A firefighter, in running clothes, being arrested in broad daylight for doing his job. Susan Dalton stood nearby, arms folded, watching the outcome she had set in motion. "Thank you. Officers," she said, "you can't be too careful these days." Terrell was guided to the patrol car and placed in the back seat. The door closed. The locks engaged. As the cruiser pulled away, the hydrant remained behind, repaired, functional, ready to supply water in an emergency. The neighborhood was safer because of what Terrell had done. But Terrell was now a suspect. Terrell arrived at the Riverside Police Department just before 6:45. He was processed like any other suspect. His pockets emptied. His fingerprints taken. A photograph snapped under fluorescent lights. No uniform. No context. Just a case number and a charge sheet that read vandalism of public property. He was placed in a holding cell, still wearing his running clothes. His fitness tracker remained on his wrist. The screen frozen mid-run, 5 miles, interrupted by handcuffs. Terrell asked to make a phone call. He was told he could after the preliminary investigation. So he waited. And as the minutes passed, the weight of what had just happened began to settle in. Not just the arrest, but the decision behind it. The fact that his credentials had been dismissed without verification, that a single phone call could have ended everything on the sidewalk. And no one had made it. At 7:15, a detective finally picked up the phone. Detective Brian Marshall called Station 14. The dispatcher who answered was Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran of the fire department. She recognized the name immediately. "Terrell Blake," she said. "Yes, he's one of ours. Fire equipment specialist." There was a pause on the line. "He's in custody." The detective said, "He was arrested for tampering with a fire hydrant." Maria's voice sharpened. "Tampering Terrell maintains hydrants. That's literally his job." "Which hydrant?" The detective gave the location. Maria pulled up the maintenance records. "That hydrant was flagged 2 weeks ago." She said, "Loose bonnet. Valve alignment issue. It was scheduled for repair. We're backlogged." The implication was unavoidable. Terrell hadn't created a problem. He had solved one. Maria requested to speak to Captain Michael Chen immediately. And with that call, the version of events the police had accepted without question began to collapse under the weight of documented truth. Captain Michael Chen received the call at 7:20 that morning. He had been reviewing reports in his office when Maria Santos told him one of his firefighters had been arrested for fixing a hydrant. For a moment, Chen thought he had misheard her. Arrested. He repeated. For what? Tampering, Maria said. At Riverside Heights. Chen stood up before the call ended. He arrived at the Riverside Police Department just before 7:45. Still in uniform, badge visible. Rank unmistakable. 22 years of service walked through the front door with him. I'm here for Terrell Blake, he told the desk sergeant. He's one of my firefighters. And you're holding him unlawfully. Detective Marshall met him in the lobby. Already guarded. We're verifying Mr. Blake's story, the detective said. A resident reported him damaging a hydrant. Then verify it properly. Chen replied. Send an inspector to that hydrant right now. I'll wait. At 8 o'clock sharp, Fire Department Inspector Tony Vasquez arrived at the corner of Riverside Heights Boulevard and Oakmont Drive. He examined the hydrant carefully. The bonnet, the valve stem, the base connection. He tested the pressure and documented everything with photographs. Then he called Captain Chen. That hydrant was failing. Vasquez said, loose bonnet, misaligned valve stem, base leak. Someone repaired it recently. Was the work done correctly? Chen asked. There was no hesitation. This was professional-level repair. Vasquez said, clean torque, proper alignment, pressure restored. Whoever did this knows hydrant systems inside and out. Chen put the call on speaker so Detective Marshall could hear. If this hydrant hadn't been fixed, Vasquez continued, and there was a fire in that area, we could have lost water pressure. With houses that close together, it could have spread fast. People could have been trapped. The room went quiet. The story the police had accepted without question no longer existed. Terrell Blake hadn't committed a crime. He had prevented one. At 8:15 that morning, a cell door opened. Terrell Blake was escorted out of holding. His wrists finally free. His face composed in the way people learn to compose themselves after humiliation. He had been in custody for nearly 2 hours arrested, processed, and detained for doing the work he was trained to do. Detective Marshall stood nearby, his tone careful, measured. Mr. Blake, you're free to go, he said. The fire department has confirmed your employment and verified that the hydrant repair was legitimate. We apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. Terrell looked at him, searching for something that wasn't there. Accountability, recognition, an acknowledgement of what had actually happened. You arrested me for doing my job, Terrell said quietly. You ignored my ID. You refused to verify my credentials. You believed a phone call over evidence. That's not an inconvenience. Captain Chen stepped forward and placed a hand on Terrell's shoulder. Let's go, he said. I'll drive you home. As they walked toward the exit, Chen turned back to the detective. We will be filing a formal complaint, he said, and the city attorney will be hearing about this. Outside, the morning had moved on. Traffic flowed. Life continued. But for Terrell, something had shifted permanently. Because once you've been handcuffed for doing everything right, you don't forget it. And inside the police department, a realization had begun to settle. And this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a failure. 8 weeks later, the paperwork became public. Blake v. City of Riverside. The lawsuit outlined what Terrell had already lived through: unlawful arrest, false imprisonment, violation of civil rights, racial profiling, and professional defamation. But it also did something else. It pulled records, patterns, history. Susan Dalton's 911 call history was subpoenaed. In the previous 2 years, she had called police 11 times to report suspicious persons, 8 of those calls involved people of color. None resulted in the discovery of criminal activity. The pattern was unmistakable. Her fear had been treated as credible. Her assumptions had triggered armed police responses, and in this case, they had resulted in the arrest of a trained professional who had prevented a public safety failure. Body camera footage showed Terrell explaining himself calmly, offering verification, asking officers to call his captain. Each request ignored. The hydrant inspection report confirmed the equipment had been malfunctioning and that the repair was executed at an expert level. The city's own maintenance logs showed the hydrant had already been flagged for repair weeks earlier. There was no version of events where the city could win. Settlement negotiations lasted 11 months. In the end, the number wasn't symbolic. It was intentional. $4.2 million. Not just compensation for Terrell's detention, humiliation, and emotional distress, but a price placed on assumption, a message written in legal language and taxpayer money. Because when systems refuse to verify the truth, they eventually pay to acknowledge it. The $4.2 million settlement closed the case on paper. But it did not erase what happened. Terrell Blake spent 10 years becoming an expert in fire suppression systems. He noticed a failing hydrant during his morning run. He used his training to fix it. He documented the repair. He was preparing to report it exactly as procedure required. And he was arrested for it. Not because the hydrant wasn't broken. Not because the repair was wrong. But because a black man performing professional work in a wealthy neighborhood did not fit the assumptions people were willing to make. The reforms that followed were necessary, but revealing. Police departments implemented mandatory verification protocols before arresting individuals who claimed professional affiliation. Firefighters were issued wallet cards with direct dispatch verification numbers. The city created a review system for repeat 911 callers whose reports repeatedly led to no criminal findings. None of those systems existed before Terrell was put in handcuffs. Officer Justin Harper was suspended without pay and required to complete bias training. Officer Amanda Foster received a formal reprimand for failing to question an unlawful arrest. Susan Dalton was named individually in the lawsuit, required to pay damages through her insurance, and ordered to complete bias education. But no punishment fully addresses the underlying truth. This was not about one officer or one caller. It was about a system trained to see threat before expertise, suspicion before verification, and fear before fact. Terrell Blake saved a neighborhood from potential disaster. The hydrant he repaired is still there, functioning, ready to deliver water if a fire breaks out. What failed that morning was not the infrastructure. It was judgment. And the lesson is as simple as it is expensive. When bias overrides evidence, the cost is measured not only in dollars but in trust, dignity, and justice. Thank you for watching.